I've been wanting to share a little bit this kind of concept. I guess you call it a technique. I never thought of it as a technique. It's a intrinsic part of my journey as a musician, as an artist, called the deep dive. I call it the deep dive. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But I'm sharing it because it's something, besides that I think it could be helpful to others to engage in the concept. It's also something I'd like to share that process with others, in my own journey with it, in case others might enjoy, be benefit from it. The deep dive is basically, as a musician, I mean, I'm sure you could do it in other arts as well, but as a musician, it's really, you take an artist, and I found it, which one I'm choosing at any given time in different ways, but essentially, it could look in a couple of different ways, but essentially, let's say I'll find a biography of this artist in a library or sometimes a bookstore, and I'll start kind of a journey of going to deep dive of that artist and, both their life, certainly their music, so as I'm going through the biography, it's not just their music, of course, it's the music they were influenced by. So as you're reading the book, sometimes it's an audiobook, sometimes it's a print book. As you're reading the book, you're listening to all of their influences, and then you're listening to their music from the earliest recordings. Depending on how good the biography is or how deep into the artist you want to go, you could listen to every single thing you can get your hands on. Nowadays, it's incredible what is accessible. Just a few years ago, you would really have to hunt down just to get a large overview of, you have to pay a lot of money to build a collection or borrow or whatever to get an artist, full catalog, let alone a lot of the sometimes obscure things that they're influenced by. But now, and there's still some of that hunting that has to go on, obscure recordings, etc. But really, so much is available online. So I'll give a little pitch, not because it's a ad or anything, but just to give a little shout out to the idea of high quality audio listening for a second. I listen to music and I have a subscription to iTunes, to Apple Music. Now it costs money. I think it comes out to be like $19 a month. I think that's a family plan, so my wife can use it also. Maybe for an individual, it might be less. And I know you can, Spotify, if you don't pay for their plan, you can still listen to music, not always with the same, you can't access everything in the order you want it, but it's a free way to listen to music. I know Spotify is a more popular way to listen to music, and clearly sharing Spotify playlists is a very easy thing to do, as opposed to the Apple playlist, which I make my playlists on Apple, and I'd love to share them with you guys, but and I will share them with you guys, but it's I don't know if you don't have an Apple Music subscription, if you can access them as easily. Maybe you can see the playlist, or maybe I can make the list and you can listen to it on whatever platform you want. But Apple Music has a lossless system, audio system, that sounds so good. And I've done a bunch of A/B tests in my studio with really good monitors and other and my sound system with a deep bass PA. I have a subwoofer also. Just A/Bing the sound quality on the Apple lossless compression. You can actually choose the highest audio quality. I think the default is already pretty high, but you can choose a higher one. And I mean, compared to Spotify, it's which is a really deep compression. It's it's night and day. One sounds like an audiophile's dream. The other sounds like crunched and smushed. Just my 2 cents on that. But I think it's worth talking about that in the sense that the quality of our experience, the quality of the level of quality we're listening to music, whether spending a lot of time on live music, acoustic music, even electric music, but that's not digital, I think is really valuable in terms of just in terms of what kind of vibe we're developing as musicians, as opposed to listening to really condensed, compressed, low bit rate recordings, there's a lot missing there that sometimes your mind can't tell the difference so clearly. With Spotify and Apple Music, you can tell the difference like no problem. I think even on a very basic system, but sometimes even when you can't logically tell the difference, you can. Your heart tells the difference. Your heart can know the difference. It's I posted on Twitter a while back. I'll post the thing again in the description here. This quote from Bob Dylan in the liner notes to Biography. It's from like the late 80s, and he's talking about AI music, which is incredible in 1980s, and he's saying that music is going to be taken over by these computers, and he's like, and the mind won't be able to tell the difference, but the heart will. It's an incredible statement, and it's so true. While I do believe, you can use digital technology as an aid to creativity, I've been checking out some perspectives online about how, really very hardline artistic perspectives against using AI just as an aesthetic choice, as a killer of creativity. I don't believe that fully, though. I see that there is a lot of soulless music and art that comes out through AI. But I think in the hands of a soulful artist or musician, AI can be useful as a tool. But that with saying, when you create something is created that's a fake version of something that's real, sometimes you can fool the mind. I think technology is getting to that point. Rick Beato had a video not too long ago how his kids are able to immediately tell when something is AI generated music and he wasn't, which is an interesting thing. But the heart can tell. That's the bottom line. The heart can tell, and that's something that is an aesthetic choice that we can. Anyway, that's my little soapbox about high quality audio. I'm not paid by Apple at all, but it's something that you can call me a Apple fanboy if you want. But bottom line, it's something that Neil Young, a few years ago, he came out with this system called Pono. He made this whole campaign talking about how low quality audio was really negatively affecting the listener's experience and the vision of the artist. And I think his campaign resulted in some of these lossless platforms. So I access through Apple Music. I'm sure there's other places. Neil Young, when he first came out with it, he had on his website, I'm not sure if it's still there, it was a few years ago that I checked it out. You can A/B on his website his music on his lossless compression and then on a regular like MP3 compression, and again, it's like night and day. And even if you can't consciously tell, you can feel it, because digital, because the way the technology works, the way I understand it, because everything in digital is converted to ones and zeros. So you have in between, whatever the bit rate is, the higher the bit rate, the more you can capture the spectrum of sound. And sometimes you're even capturing that which is beyond conscious hearing. But certainly between, let's say, nodes of, let's say you have like a low pixel, a picture that's very pixelated, right? So you can see the general picture, but all the details in between are more fuzzy. So audio definitely can be like that. And sometimes, again, it's not what you can consciously hear, but the heart knows. Okay, so that was a little about. So anyway, I listen to it, read a book. I'll give you an example. One I did last summer was Otis Redding. So I don't know, something, I sang the song Dock of the Bay at some jam session, which is a song I love, and I love Otis Redding, but I realized I never, something hit me about that song, about the meaning of that song, which I'd never thought about before, that, just kind of analyzing it in my mind. The Dock of the Bay is it's a really dark song. It really is. It's almost like a suicidal song, as beautiful as it is. And it's interesting, it's one of the last things Otis Redding recorded before he passed away. So after singing this song, I then thinking about this song, and realizing how little I knew, like the breadth of Otis Redding's music and his story. I was at the library and I just looked up and there was a great biography out by Otis Redding. I'll put the link in the description. I'm trying to make lists of, because I've gone through a lot in the past of biographies, some of which I don't even have anymore, and I'd have to really dig to find. But this one's Otis Redding book came out in the last couple of years, and it was a really, really good biography. And I made playlists of all his albums. I mean, both some of the music that he was influenced by, that was happening at the time when he was coming up, and then all his albums. And it was a really incredible experience. You know, it's that kind of stacks soul music development and his particular place in it. What was his role as a musician? It was very fascinating to me. And the practical, like the technique as a musician in doing something like this, is it because you get into it's not just as an experience as a listener and reading about. You can learn so much about the way an artist approaches their art and what inspired them and what brought them to the place that they are. But also, you know, recording techniques. There's instrument things that that go on, especially with the stack stuff. Exactly, the instrumentation and how they arranged music. There's so much you can get out of it. And then, of course, as a musician, you sit down and transcribe or just figure out some of the parts and play some of the tunes. Write down some of the lyrics. As a songwriter, you really get it gives you a whole new download of perspective, even if it's an artist you like and have been influenced by, but it's a whole different level of influence. The way jazz musicians transcribe songs and solos in order to improve their craft. So any musician can and should do this, and I'm sure that really good musicians or successful musicians already know this fact. But it's something that it took me a long time to kind of figure out how valuable this is. Besides like the ear training, but just getting inside of a song and picking it apart. So most recently, I've been on a Jimmy Smith a Hammond B3 journey. So I've in terms of the Hammond B3, there's so much to talk about the Hammond B3, and a lot of what I'd like to share is my thoughts on the B3 and its history and as a player and figuring out what works and what works for me, from playing techniques to styles to recording techniques, all things that I figured out. But I really, it's an instrument I've played for a while, and it was much more recently that it became clear that like this is my instrument, meaning this is the instrument that I'm most connected to. I play a lot of instruments, and I know a lot of musicians out there, especially nowadays. You have these home recording studios, and you play a lot of different instruments. To focus on one, to really, when I was in jazz school, there was this idea that I took piano, I was focusing on piano, but then I also wanted to take drums. I've always dreamed when I was 3 years old of being a drummer, so I had needed some extra credits in music school, so I took some drum lessons also, and I was part of the drum ensemble also, which I got. Some of the guys in the department gave me a hard time, partly because it's just it's another drummer to work into the rotation. It was like, well, you're focused on one instrument, and they had a point saying, if you're focusing on more than one instrument, you're not really mastering one, and there is a truth to that. But ultimately, as a music producer, I feel like I've benefited from trying and getting, really going in deep dives in different instruments at a time. In my recent journey, I got really into classical guitar for a bit. I started learning a couple of pieces, and I really appreciate that, to be able to go into different things, and it really informs your musicality and your influences. But at some point, I think it's really good to be clear. And sometimes a person, when it finds this at a younger age. For me, it's been very recently. And here's an instrument that I can really lean into and really learn everything I possibly can about it, and the techniques and the history of it, and etc. Now, the Hammond organ is not a simple instrument to acquire nor to move around. Thank God it to maintain it actually, even to maintain, to fix if it's broken. But there's a guy in Florida. There's a big market for, or at least a niche market for Hammonds and repair. At least where I am, South Florida. There's a guy. I think it's like one guy, but he's really busy, mostly because of the churches. It's really popular in churches. In terms of jazz or certainly rock and roll or other kinds of music, it's really, I wouldn't say it would fall out of favor because everyone still loves the sound, but it's, people go, they again, this whole thing with the digital versus real analog, you can't compare. There's no copy of a Hammond, even if it can fool the ear, which I don't think, at this point, I still don't think they've created one. Even when you pair it with a Leslie, fool the ear. But even if you can, it doesn't fool the heart. So I'm going to get more into as we go. I'd like to get into more deep dive with Jimmy Smith. I couldn't find a biography of him. I mean, I've been finding all the recordings. I find interviews online, some videos, but so if anyone watching this has heard of or knows about a biography, I even searches online. It's crazy. I can't find a single biography of Jimmy Smith. But let me know in the comments if you find something. And to be continued. Thank you for listening.